Discovery and Education, brought to you by KID-AFAN with me, Anza Toure. Well, in today's Discovery program, we are here to talk about, and more importantly, to look into, the lives of disabled students in the country. Many times we talk about education, we hardly think about the disabled community. Well, today I have with me Bankole Labode Ayu, who is a final year student at the Mass Comm department at Furabe College, and he's here to share with us his experience as a disabled student in the educational community. Bankole, good evening and welcome to the program.
Good evening, viewers. It's a pleasure being here.
Okay, so Bankole, as we start with the program, let's start first of all about yourself, as we are looking not only to discover, the issues that bank disability in education, but also we have a certain kind of interest in your life as a student, and more importantly as a disabled student. So tell the viewers about yourself.
So hi once again. So I am Bankole Labode Ayu, a final year student in the University of Sierra Leone, specifically Furabe College, a student that is living with a visual impairment. I enrolled and was accepted in the University of Sierra Leone in 2019 to study for a degree in mass communication.
And of course, in mass communication, there are specialties which students strive to get their niche in. So which niche are you specialized in presently?
So I am a honors 2 student majoring in public relations.
Wow, interesting. So Bankole, let's see, you entered in FBC in 2019 to study mass comm. So tell us a bit about your experience. What has it been like as a disabled student in a university or in a college and department where most of your colleagues are physically able students?
Thank you. My journey in the university has been characterized by courage and sheer determination amid a range of challenges. From the very first day since I entered the university, I have always faced what I would call structural and systemic difficulties that have posed significant challenge to my well-being in the university. I have been able to negotiate my way through, but when it comes to materials, there are barely no materials available for students living with visual impairment. There are no materials in the form of audiobooks. There are no braille copies of whatsoever material you go looking for in the university's library. There is also a structural discrimination which we have been faced with. There is no building in the premises of Furabe College that is disabled friendly, and the Disability Act of 2011 provides that disabled people should be given and allowed to have access to every public building or public asset or roads, but it's a complete far cry from what obtains in the country's most prestigious university. Notably, the Kennedy building is very unfriendly for every form of disability, especially my peers who are using the wheelchair and those of us with visual impairment. So on a personal level, I've just managed to scrape through, but there are no materials for us. Even the granting aid which we have available to us, it only covers our tuition fees. That is as far as it goes. There are no provisions for transportation, you name it. Nothing absolutely logistical. So we basically have to make do with what we can afford. If at all you can afford to make your way for classes on a daily basis, fine. If you are privileged enough to receive support from well-wishers or family, fine. But the legal framework, which is the Disability Act, only provides for granting aid, and that only covers our tuition. So sadly enough, these are some of them.
And the irony in what you've just explained is that Fuabe College actually happens to be the first learning institution in the country to actually install a disability center on its premises. I mean, first of all, I want you to tell us exactly what you felt like when you had that news a couple of years ago that FBC would be opening, a disability center, and what did you expect from them?
I was filled with a mixture of expectation and reserved optimism, because knowing my society for what it is, we do not lack policies whatsoever. We have the requisite policies that would ensure a productive society. So with the advent of the center of our Center for Persons with Disability at Fuabe College, I was really expecting a lot. But then, as it has turned out, the systemic neglect has not allowed the center to actually materialize its purpose. We are still very much under-financed. We do not have any form of empowerment. The workers at the center are not on salary. We are seriously lacking any materials. It is not only supposed to be a center that would push forward our cases as disabled people, it can also be a research center. But even the machines that are there do not always have access to internet. You can imagine what we are going through. All we do there when we go there every day is to just sit and chart the way forward for students with disability. But there's barely anything to write home in that center other than we advocate our issues. That is as far as it goes.
Okay, so let's go more into the center. When you look at the the structure of management of the center itself, do you think it is well represented? Because most times we find the best form of representation is appointing somebody who is a member of the community itself that is to be represented. Is that the case?
Yes, the center is very much reflective of individuals living with disability. I can assure you that it is purely run and governed by people living with disability. The only challenge is recognition. I still think the university authorities are yet to come to terms with the fact that we have a center that exists to propagate our issues. When it comes to our exams, for instance, for all students living with visual impairment, it was initially said that we should start taking our exams in the center, but then because of challenges related to monitoring and other stuff, electricity supply, we could not sit to our exams at the center. So we are really struggling for recognition. Had that not been the case, I'm sure by now the center would have been well involved in planning when it comes planning surrounding students with disability. We do not have, the whole system in Fuabe College does not have a sign language interpreter, to my knowledge. how can you do inclusive education without a sign language interpreter? It is only when you get the Center for Persons with Disability and students living with disability involved that you can know the challenges surrounding students living with disability. There are no copies, there are no braille copies of our questions, our examination questions. There are, as I've said already, there are no braille copies of any materials in mass communication. And this is a shared problem across the board. But if the center is not involved, then the system cannot adequately tackle such challenges.
But Bankole, you spoke earlier about recognition in terms of the administration's attention towards some of the issues that you face. Have you ever had a parley with the administration? Have you discussed some of these issues with them?
Sure. Well, I should humbly say that I am not the leader of the center. We have a hierarchy, okay. But I can assure you that the center has in the past been engaging with appropriate stakeholders in the university, within the premises of the university.
And how did they respond to these issues that you just mentioned?
Well, largely their response has not been unwelcoming. They've always given us the impression that we can always approach them, especially when it comes to putting out the names of students with disability who've been applying for the granting aid, which I've already mentioned about. So they've always given us the impression that the policy is an open door one. But actually, when it does come to the real issue, I can tell you that disabled people and issues surrounding students living with disability is almost always treated as a secondary matter. We are never prioritized. We are never. So it's one thing to say you mean what you say, then it's another thing to actually do the talk.
Okay. So Bankole, when we talk about the issues surrounding, you've obviously talked about the infrastructural and the administrative aspect of some of the issues you face. But they are not the only elements of the society you live in as a disabled student.
Sure.
So how has been your experience? What has been your experience with fellow students that you obviously have to, socialize with on campus?
Yeah. I can say, largely my experience with fellow students has been enjoyable. I cannot help but notice the quite remarkable growth in awareness levels, awareness among my peers. Before this time, while I was in secondary school at the Great St. Edward's Secondary School, there used to be a lot of ignorance and narrow-mindedness towards disability and persons living with disability. But the college landscape has left me very much pleased with how much growth, how much improvement has been made in that respect. I have encountered a lot of good friends with a positive mindset towards disability. They are helpful, they help you get your notes, they do help me negotiate my way around. They chip in one way or the other in many, many respects. So I think it has to do with how the individual, that is the person living with disability, carry themselves again.
Okay.
It is an argument of the disabled person's life mirrors how the society relates to you.
Okay, so viewers, once again, we are talking in the studio today with Bankole Labode Oyu, Of course, he is a disabled student at the Furabe College, and he is a final year student studying mass communications. And he has been here today, of course, to discuss some of the issues disabled students like himself face. And of course, we are talking on a personal level about his experience at the campuses of the University of Sierra Leone, specifically Furabe College. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll continue with the rest of the program. Well, welcome back to the second part of this week's edition of Discovery in Education, brought to you by KID-AFAN Discoveries, with me, Hamza Touré. Well, as I mentioned earlier, in the studio I have with me Bankole Labode Oyu, who is a final year student at the Furabe College, studying mass communication. Well, earlier we were in the first part of the program, we were talking about some of his challenges that he has experienced as a disabled student in the college. So this second part, Labode, let's start off with sensitization, because when we talk about disability issues, I personally feel that these are issues that people need to be sensitized about, because ignorance, of course, can be deadly to any idea or towards any party. So let's talk about what you think is the rate of sensitization on disability issues in learning institutions, especially Furabe College.
I think we have come a long way, but there is nevertheless quite a long journey that lies ahead on many fronts. Firstly, on an individual level, a lot of individuals are still, can I say, ignorant about how, for instance, students living with disability could sit to an exam. It's amazing to learn that even some lecturers, for start, are not aware of how a blind student can sit to their exams. Some are even surprised to know that a blind student can use the computer proficiently, as well as a student who is able-bodied does, or even more than they do. So our society has a long way to go. The other day, I had a personal talk with a very senior director general in one of our MDAs in this country, and I was stunned, remarkably stunned, to learn that he is not aware that a visually impaired person can use the computer. He's not aware, he is not in his life, or before that time he had not seen a visually impaired person read before. He has heard about Braille, but he has never seen it being manifested. So it tells you that on an individual basis, first and foremost, we have a long way to go, and it cascades to our institutions as well. There is only one or two institutions in our country that I know of that can boast of having a special needs desk. The ECSL, Electoral Commission of Sierra Leone, recently got a special needs desk. They call it inclusive unit. Another one is the Ministry of Basic Education. But that is as far as it goes. You know, our institutions need a lot of sensitization surrounding issues related to people living with disability. Until and unless we can have the Disability Act propagated and the awareness levels increased in our country, then people living with disability would always face that structural and systemic barrier, which I have made mention of more often than not in this interview so far.
Okay, so Bankole, let's talk about, we've of course discussed the at length, at least if I may, the issues that you face, and I'm sure students like you face in these learning institutions. Now, what are some of the recommendations would you give that you think would address some of these issues?
Okay, so first and foremost, I would humbly suggest, that the University of Sierra Leone puts in place a mechanism that would allow it to have a special needs desk. That unit will be tasked to the responsibility of championing issues around special needs, issues surrounding people living with disability. And on a departmental level as well, and it's close to my heart, I wrote that as part of my recommendation in my internship report, that departments should have a special needs unit. It would make the burden of the Ministry of Tertiary and Higher Education easier. It has to start from somewhere. Furthermore, I would suggest to the governance structure that the students granting aid, which students living with disability apply for every year, should go beyond just ordinary tuition fees being catered for. There are challenges that are far beyond tuition fees. It is unimaginable the turmoil and challenge an ordinary disabled student undergoes every day to make their way to the premises of Robe College and other learning institutions, tertiary institutions. So I'm saying that a program is brought into being whereby we can provide allowances for students living with disability. The government should also procure special learning materials, braille materials, audiobooks, and other technological instruments that would aid learning for students living with disability. And also, there are very few sign language interpreters in our country. For our peers who live with hearing impairments or deafness, education for them in Sierra Leone stops at secondary school level. That is unfair in this day and age. The system thoroughly discriminates students, people living with auditory impairment. I would also put forward that the government makes attractive a package whereby people can be encouraged to go in to study sign language, and they can have very handsome salary packages that would lure them to embrace such a proposal. I think there are many other recommendations I have, but for the exigency of time, I would leave it at that.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Bankole. Of course, that is Bankole Labode Oyu, a final year student at the Forabe College studying mass communications. He also happens to be a visually impaired student, and he is here today to help us discover some of the experiences that some of the visually and other disabled students like himself face at learning institutions. And of course, we cannot ignore the homogeneity of these experiences. We cannot say, no, that's just Labode's own experience. It is not his. We cannot say that this is only limited to him. Of course, there are other students who are visually impaired. There are other amputee students, and there are, of course, students, as he mentioned, with auditory impairments, also known as deafness, who have been discriminated against by the system. Okay, and I think if we listened to him as he spoke, some of these issues are not intentionally done by the society. It's not as if we sit and say we don't want disabled people to progress. I think it's mainly because, if Bankole would agree with me, it's mainly because we lack the sensitization, we lack the awareness to understand that some of these issues exist and that they should be experienced, that they should be addressed. Well, this is how we end today's edition of the program. On behalf of my executive producer, Dr. Aissatou Kakejalo, and my cameraman, Daddy Abu, we want to say thank you very much for taking your sweet time and precious time to watch our program. Mind you, we'll be back next week with another edition of the program, wherein we'll see what we can discover in next week's edition. Thank you very much for your time. Until we meet again, I have been your host, Hamza Toure. Tata.